Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to begin in the second chapter of the book of Philippians. And the best place to turn to get some historical context would be the 16th chapter of Acts. We learned that Paul had personally founded this assembly by prompting the conversion of a wealthy tradeswoman by the name of Lydia, and he also expelled the demon from a Greek slave girl and was imprisoned for such by the jealous, hostile Jewish authorities. And in prison, he converted the jailer, who Paul and his traveling companion then was Barnabas. They escaped on his watch, and the jailer was had cause to be fearful of losing his job, and they used the occasion when he was at his all-time low to prompt him into a conversion. But from those three backgrounds, Jewish, Greek, and Roman, we get a trajectory of how diverse this assembly of congregants might have been, because Philippi, which was in the Roman province of Achaia, which corresponds to the modern country of Greece, was a cosmopolitan city, and as such would have had diverse backgrounds. Now, diversity can be a force of disunity and division, and Philippians is distinct from the other the majority of Paul's epistles directed to assemblies, in that there doesn't seem to be any doctrinal confusion. He's not correcting the error or the heresy of the Judaizers and the super apostles and the proto-Gnostics, but we do witness a doctrinal affirmation of what is known as the incarnation, and that's going to form the focal point of this passage. So without further ado, we're going to get into it. And the first verse reads, "If then there is any encouragement in Messiah, if any comfort of love, if any fellowship of spirit, if any affection and compassion, make my joy complete by being of the same mind, having the same love, one in being and of purpose." So the source of their unity, as people think, they become and are. So really, he wants them to be united in mind and purpose, and the source on which they're supposed to concentrate their mind and affections toward is the Messiah, who eliminates all racial barriers and restrictions and socioeconomic divisions and unites everyone under any gender and elevates the slave and humbles the ruler. So that is the source of unity, and equality is found in the oneness in the Messiah, and he's the object standard of our faith. Now, faith in itself is morally neutral. Its character is wholly, completely determined by the object of the faith. So a lot of people like to put faith in the things of the fleeting things of the world, and it doesn't wind up too well for them. But we should know better, and that's why we're here. "Doing not through selfishness or self-conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourself." So selfishness has the same divisive effect as diversity, potentially, or actually diversity doesn't necessarily have to be a source of division. It just carries the potential, which selfishness 100% of the time always will, because there's no place in the assembly for a selfish saint, let alone a pastor. Now, anyone who preaches for any motive, if they aggrandize themselves or preach for profits for profit, PROPEET versus PROFIT. So if they're teaching for gain, then that mixture of selfishness in the message, the good news cannot remain the good news it can remain as it is only in as much as there is no element of selfishness interjected in it. And that's equally applicable for the leaders of the church as the followers, because selfishness leads to ruin, and self-conceit, more or less interchangeable. Humility, consider others better than yourself. Now, humility is not to have a degraded estimation of oneself. It is to have the correct and accurate assessment of ourselves. Now, it is dangerous to think of yourself more highly than you ought, but it is equally dangerous to think of yourself less than Yahweh does. And we are all of value in his eyes. We're all sinners saved by grace, so we are of value, but apart from our salvation and apart from the grace upon which it's founded, we have no cause for boasting or anything to be proud of or anything along those lines. Each one should look out not only for his own interests, but also for the interest of others. Now, there's no sound utilitarian argument that can be made against this. If everyone looks out for themselves, the ethos of community is fractured and irrecoverable, because community only exists in as much as we uplift and serve one another. For let this mind be in you, which was also in Messiah Yahshua. So he's the model, besides the source of unity and equality and uplifting. He's also the model for which they're to emulate. Now, he at this point was resurrected in heaven, but Paul had personally witnessed the resurrection on the road to Damascus. But he also used himself as a model, because remember, what we call the New Testament, the book of Philippians, was written as an epistle to them, but it wasn't part of any compilation organized into the New Testament. So they really had no other idea for who Yahshua is and what he was like other than the minister. And there's various locations throughout his epistles, in each Thessalonians letter and 1 Corinthians 11:1, where Paul says, imitate me as I imitate Christ. Now, the key word there is to imitate me only in as much as I imitate the Messiah, because Paul wasn't perfect, but he abided in the one who was perfect, and he was his example, and through him, model to be witnessed for. Who, being in the form of Elohim, did not regard equality with Elohim a matter to be grasped. Now, this, I'm sure the majority of conventional Christians are inclined to disagree, but there's a misnomer, I feel, about the equality of the three members of what are known as the Trinity, Father, Son, and Spirit. Now, I think in some sense they are all equal, but I think that functionally speaking, the Son and the Spirit are functionally subordinate to the Father. One way of looking at it is as a triangle. So Yahweh's at the top, and the Spirit is his way of reaching us, and the Son is our way of reaching him, which is the way, truth, and life, John 14:6. But when he ministered on earth for a brief 3-year period, he was his way of Yahweh reaching man, and then after that he designated the Spirit as his successor. So post-resurrection, Messiah is our way of reaching man, Yahweh, and the Spirit performs the function that he once did, to visit us and enable us and empower us on earth. But emptied himself, taking the form of a servant, and came to be in the likeness of men. Now, a lot of the more militantly monotheistic religions, namely Judaism and Islam, cannot fathom how a divine being could dwell in the limitations of a human frame. And this is ultimately a profound mystery, because we read here that he was fully man and fully divine, yet he didn't have the fullness of the infinite attributes. He was subject to the parameters of time and space. He got sick, he bled, he thirsted, he ate, and he didn't have what may be fully labeled omniscience, as he, by his own confession in Matthew 24 and I think Mark 13, he said, "No, I don't know the hour of my return. Only the Father in heaven knows." In that. So it was sacrifice through which this assumes his pre-existence, which is that he has always existed before the creation. He was a partner in the creation. He was a collaborator in the creation. Yet, when he assumed human form, he had to do so in order to be functionally subordinate without losing his equality in essence. So he's still the same essence as the Father, but he's subject to a lesser plane of existence in the flesh. Yet he doesn't compromise the divinity because he's sinless. So even though he exists in the flesh, he's not subject to the flesh, because he always had it under control. His flesh was always submitted to his spirit, and this is the spirit we're supposed to emulate. And having been found in fashion as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient unto death, death even of a cross. So the ultimate purpose, his whole entire ministry, as useful as his preaching was, it was really to be of eternal significance through the cross, and this was the ultimate reason for which he was made. This was the meaning of his ministry, because it is on the cross that our purpose, our entire purpose comes into fruition. It's through the cross that we may enjoy eternal fellowship. And now when a lot of people look at the cross, they see a gruesome spectacle and they find it revolting physically, so they turn away spiritually. But the disciple, with the eyes of discernment, when they see on the cross, they have to see the love, because it is an act of supreme love, unduplicated, that we can never ever hope to mimic or duplicate, yet we are called to emulate the spirit of sacrificial love. Now, sacrifice and suffering is the ultimate expression of love, so no more than we should desire to live without love should we desire to live without suffering. And this makes us distinct from nearly every other religion. Yahweh, therefore, has exalted him and given him the name which is above every name. So because he obediently complied with his divinely appointed and ordained earthly mission, he is richly rewarded in heaven, and it's under his name, Acts 4:12. There is no other name but the Son, through which we must be saved. They use the word must, stressing the imperative. And atheists, heretics, retrobates, cultural Marxists, they can rant and rave all they want. But at the end of the day, when history reaches its consummation, every tongue that doesn't confess him now will confess him then. So it's ultimately, I feel we may even be getting far ahead of ourselves, so I'm going to read the verses before I continue to say what I was going to say. That at the name of Yahshua, every knee should bow, of those in the heaven, and of those on earth, and of those under the earth, and every tongue should confess that Yahshua the Messiah is Master, to the esteem of Yahweh the Father. So this is the end of time is known from the beginning. History moves according to its inexorable march, according to providence, which is the divine oversight. And the consummation of that is that the assembly, those who abide in him, are going to be taken up to heaven with him. And there's going to be 1,000-year millennial period, the 7th dispensation, which comes after the 6th dispensation, alternately known as the church age or the age of grace, which we currently live in. And every tongue should confess, so that means that even though we have the choice now, we neglect to exercise that choice, given the warning, knowing the outcome. We're better off confessing it now. Now, it's never too late until it is, so why wait? This is an implicit warning and an encouragement for any of those who have made it this far by sheer happenstance of curiosity. Curiosity is good, but it's got to lead somewhere, so the purpose of this discourse and these discourses is not to stimulate your curiosity, but to engender the conviction that leads to conversion and commitment. So that, my beloved, as you always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now much rather in my absence, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. Now, there's a saying that the true test of a man or a woman is what they do when no one's looking. So Paul had not an espionage network, but an intelligence network of sorts, because remember, he was a pan-national church assembly planter of sorts, so he had his foot in more than one door across the Eastern Mediterranean, and he ultimately relied on reporters to give him reports of how his various flocks were doing. And the Philippians are distinct from the majority of the others, and that they gave him no serious cause for complaint. There's still division and disunity, more cultural than doctrinal, because the doctrinal errors were tearing the other churches asunder, and Paul had to aggressively combat that. But we witness here a positive affirmation rather than a negative of a true theological doctrine, rather than a negative dismantlement of a false or erroneous heretical doctrine. And there was no shortage of those especially prominent in the early age, but it's been with us ever since. and work out your salvation with fear and trembling. This is the proper attitude. There's presumption, which is the counterfeit version of faith, which there's, we don't have time to get into the debate, but the doctrine of eternal assurance, whereby once a Christian declares himself a Christian or is saved, they are saved eternally. So, and there's really no scriptural foundation for that doctrine. So in light of that, we are to work out our salvation as if it could be lost. Be fresh, hold it tight, hold on to it, spread the love, spread the message, but always keep your eye on yourself first, because in case it can perish, that's something we should be mindful of. So don't have fear, not in your eternal outcome, but in the fact that you can lose your eternal standing as you now stand. And that's a call for repetition and consistency. So on that note, tune in next time. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.